And joining us from Geneva is CCTV's James Chau. And James, the money WHO is requesting, we're hearing a large portion of the money, almost half, is going to fund WHO headquarter operations. What exactly is the money going to be used for?
$56 million, as you said, Azier, about $25 million of that for WHO, and they've earmarked another $31 million for a range of partners. So let's break it down for you. When we look at surveillance, that's surveillance of the Aedes mosquitoes, but also surveillance of the Zika virus, surveillance of any neurological abnormalities in children that are still being born right now. They've earmarked $7.1 million for that. Community engagement is much more, $15.4 million. And why? When you look at the details, you'll see why. It's promoting awareness, it's fighting stigma, it's dispelling rumors, which can be very, very difficult, as we saw also during Ebola, to really try to get the misinformation out of the way so that people have good information and they can take action within their own selves.
And I gotta ask you, what happens if they don't get the money they need?
Well, I think by instinct, I'll say that there is no choice. Why? Because I don't think that there is that option for the world to sit back and to watch. We've seen with Ebola how devastating it can be for the most vulnerable communities. But I think also with the Olympics just 6 months away, Brazil, the worst affected country, Brazil, the host country of the 2016 Rio Games, it's really put a spotlight on it. So it's not just a problem for Brazil or a problem for Latin America, but think of the tens of thousands of athletes, coaches, spectators, government officials, government leaders who'll be going there. So really, Brazil can't afford this to get even bigger, but the world in itself will be allied in a way in solidarity because its fate has now been thrown in with a country that for many people outside of the Latin American continent seems very, very far away. Lastly, I would say that it's the human aspect. When you look at this Zika virus, it's still to be confirmed whether it has a direct link to microcephaly, where babies are born with much smaller heads, but also that triggers enormous neurological and developmental issues later on. I think that when you just see those pictures, as I'm sure you have time and time again in newspapers, online, but also on television, it's a really disturbing sight in the sense that it attacks the very youngest of us, and that it seems so cruel in a way that Ebola was cruel, not only that people died, but in the way that they died, bleeding from so many areas. So I think that when you look at this, when you look at the babies who are in the front lines of that suffering, I don't really see how people will fail to give. We'll wait and see whether they do give and how much they do give. But I think from an emotional point of view, it's an extremely tragic story.
And James, what about vaccinations? Is there any update on that front?
Well, Margaret Chan has been telling us in WHO that really the two main leaders in the race to find a vaccine are a group of US government scientists from the National Institute of Health and also an Indian biotech group called Bharat Biotech. And where they differ is that the American scientists, close to where you are, of course, they're developing a vaccine along the similar lines of DNA being used for a vaccine for the West Nile virus. So in some ways, they do have some knowledge. They do have a bit of a head start that way. When you look at the Indian biotech group, they say, in fact, that they are now ready at any time for preclinical testing in animals. When is it going to be for preclinical testing in humans? It is predicted about 18 months from now. But when I asked Margaret Chan, as you saw just there, about the hope that Asia could give, the fact that there is the level and the quality of science now in this region, but also the exposure to many major diseases in the past, that experience, that knowledge, that know-how from the past is certainly going to help in moving forward. And I think one wonders whether the answer for Zika could actually come from an entirely different continent. That said, as we said, historically Zika has been present in Asia, particularly Southeast Asian countries, starting in the 1970s. So again, it's not totally foreign to this continent at all.
All right, CCTV's James Chau joining us from Geneva. Thank you, James.